Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan from startups.com, joined as ever by my partner, friend, CEO, and founder of startups.com, Wil Schroeder. Wil, failure is a big part of startups, right? We know this. Percentage-wise, it represents the majority of the companies that start will have some level of failure at some point. One thing that you and I like to talk about is how does the founder feel during all of that? How should the founder feel during all of that? And a concept that you've brought up that I will wholeheartedly support is that the founders still deserve respect in all of this, right? That simply because you've failed in whatever way, shape, or form doesn't mean that you're a failure, right? And doesn't mean that you lack respect in this moment. We're having hundreds and hundreds of conversations now on a monthly basis across our founders groups. How often is this coming up in your conversations?
Weekly. I mean, play this out, man. Statistically, most startups fail, and yet none of us really have an understanding of how we should feel in that moment or what that means. It's kind of like this. If you're playing almost any sport, you're going to lose a lot, right? You're not just gonna win every time. And it's almost like if no one ever talked about losing, as if winning was the only default condition for everyone involved, right? And I think in this case, because this is such an uncharted territory, right? Like everybody that goes through this is like it's like puberty for the first time. They're like, "Oh, it's only happening to me," right? And we get to this point where we have to sit across from a founder, you and I, and all the people say in the founders groups, and we have to say, look, this is kind of how this goes. This is how you should actually be processing this. This is when we say how to feel, we can't prescribe how to feel, but we can give people a bit of a recipe or a playbook for how to kind of process all these emotions, which I think, would you agree, is kind of at the heart of this? Like, how should I be thinking about this?
Yeah, yeah. Again, I think this is another one of those where permission gets involved a little bit. Like it's okay to feel certain ways about this, right?
Right,
And yeah, it's not going to feel great. Nothing we're
right.
going to say today is going to make you go, "I failed," and it feels awesome, man. I can't wait to do that again. I hope the "I can't wait to do that again" part is true, meaning that you've got the tenacity and the perseverity to come back and to do this thing again, despite failure. Yeah, but yeah, there is a playbook. There is a kind of a way to process this, and in a lot of ways, like I think what we'll talk about today are things that you should also ignore, right? So there are some ways that maybe you shouldn't process this, or will be less healthy if you process them in that way. Yeah, so let's dig into it, man.
Yeah, well, okay, so at a high level, here's a great way to not process it. Stuff it all way down. Don't talk to anybody about it. Right? Shut yourself off from the world in your cocoon and just beat yourself up nonstop. Like that, which is kind of where we all land. So that is by far the worst possible way to go about this. I mean, I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, yeah, the full internalization. Yeah, let's just shove it deep down.
Right.
Maybe it'll crystallize into a diamond under all that pressure and heat.
It does
It
not.
doesn't turn into a diamond.
I think that's where, let's say, the we mentioned founder groups just 'cause this is just pretty common form for this, but I mean, it could be whatever, your circle of trust looks like. But I think when folks in the founder groups are opening up about these things, we've had some people in the last month, let's say, and that's pretty common. I mean, it just happens. Being in a particular group, I've been in a few of them where founders have opened up and they've said, "Hey, this didn't work, and I don't even know how to process all this." I mean, there's kind of binary stuff. Like I know I need to wind things down. I need to take care of finances. The term they use, settle my affairs. But that's not really what we're talking about. They're not asking.
Sounds so final.
Yeah, well, no, I know. I was trying to not use that, but that's kind of how it feels. But I think that's not really what their concerns are. Their concerns are, how do I close the bank account? Their concerns that often it's so raw and so early. It really stems from, how do I process this like mentally? My personal validation is at stake in a big way, right? My feeling of self is at stake. My relationship, all these things are all of a sudden mushrooming, and I've been thinking about them and worrying about them, but I'm not processing them, and I'm sure as hell not talking about them.
Yeah, and that's I mean the stem of so many founder issues is just the silence. I'm just going to stay in my cone of silence and shame and not talk about this to anyone, and then eventually something else will happen that will distract me, and I'll feel a little bit better temporarily. But that stuff does add up, just like bad debt. Yeah, we've talked about this across a couple of episodes. We talked about separating self from the startup. And I would say there is no harder time to do that than when things are going wrong, right? Funnily enough, it's easier to do it when things are going right, because then you can turn around, you can high five the team, you can give accolades to everybody that helped contribute to this. But at the very end of failure, we've talked about this before too, there's nobody to high five, right? You're like, well, guys, we gave it our best.
Yeah, no.
Shit, there is no one else in the room. Right? I am now completely and utterly alone.
I think socially, two things happen. I think the first thing that happens is we start to cut ourselves off from the group, right? Whatever our social connections are, people that work there, et cetera. And we just want to create some insulation because we either don't want to have that conversations, and I get it. I get why you wouldn't want to have those conversations. Maybe you're not ready for them, or maybe you are ready for them. You still just don't want to have them, right? Totally, both make sense. The second, though, is you've got all these constituencies, friends, families, investors, employees, customers in some case, social media at large, right? All of these people that you're sitting there going, well, how are they going to process it?
Yeah.
And really all this maps back to our own validation, right? If everybody thought it was awesome that you shut it down, you'd have no problem with this, right? But we start making up all of these scenarios as to how people are going to process this. And most of them are wrong. In almost every case, we wildly overshoot people's reaction. TLDR, no one gives a shit. And beyond that, we begin this whole process, and we probably started it a while ago, with just torturing ourselves, right? We're like, we're going to beat ourselves up with a bunch of what ifs and, hey, what do they think? And all these things. And in the end, it's going to buy us nothing. It's going to cost us a ton. And guess what? We're going to be totally wrong. we're going to look back and go, oh my God, what a colossal waste of time and effort and emotion that was. I went about it all wrong. And I think, that's essentially what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. I think it comes from a lot of places, but I think that one of the major ones is revisiting all those conversations with those people. Social media less so, right? But like individuals, right? So friends, family, staff, co-founders, investors, all those conversations you had early on where this was the best thing ever, everything was going well. And sometimes those conversations weren't all that long ago, right? Startups can turn on a dime, and is that still a phrase? Do we still issue dimes? I don't know. It's like you can turn on an Amex, right? Never understood that either. But in any case, these things can happen fast, right? The tides can change quickly, and what was a conversation of you selling this thing into the stratosphere 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, is now the exact opposite, and it's returning to Earth in a burning hunk, right? So
Right. And the world just went through that scale with COVID, right, Ryan?
sure did, absolutely.
I mean, at so many levels, this has just been happening everywhere, which I think makes the episode fairly timely. But if we were to say, here are a few of the high points that we always use to kind of create a structure and, like we mentioned, like a recipe around how to process this. First and foremost, if you're sitting across from us right now, Ryan and I, and we're having this conversation, right? Either in a founder group or just a one-on-one, two-on-one setting, I guess in this case. First thing we'd be very clear about: no one else even took a swing, and what that means is we're so worried about what so many other people who weren't founders think, right? It's the equivalent of sitting in the stands and in the stands talking about what a crap job the quarterback did, or name your sport, and then the quarterback turning around and going, "Dude, you've never even done my job."
Right.
Like, you seem to have a strong opinion of what I should and shouldn't have done.
That's the appropriate response, right? That's the
Right.
appropriate response. Unfortunately, it'd be like me sitting courtside and like, I don't know, Steph Curry missing the game-winning shot and then turning to me and me like having a disappointed look on my face, being like, dude, you got to square up. And him being like, you know what, Ryan? You're right. You're absolutely right. And then like thinking about that for the next 3
perfect.
weeks. Like I have any idea how to shoot the ball better than he does, having not even shot a basketball in probably 15 years. Like, but we take this shit to heart. Like we listen to the armchair quarterbacks. We listen to the assholes who haven't tried. Where the appropriate response is, you know what, Fred? Go file your TPS report and go fuck yourself. You've got a regular job. You have no idea what I went through to get here. You've never tried this. So your input, while no, not even appreciated, is also not valid. So I don't need it. Take it elsewhere. That should be the response. Maybe not quite that strong, but I'm a little fired up today.
And you can Google it because I'm going to kill this entire explanation. But I saw one of the most amazing responses years ago by the man himself, Steve Jobs, and he was getting ridiculed by a reporter. I think it was Valleywag back when Valleywag was still around, but it was one of these kind of super cynical blogs back in the day, and they were talking about. I can't remember either the MacBook or some product that was, they were kind of like just burning him about something. And Jobs, in pure Jobs fashion, doesn't go press release or anything else like that. And this is kind of before social media really at any level of scale. He writes him directly and he says, "Hey, what have you ever done?" He said, I created the Macintosh and the iPhone. What the fuck have you done?" And it was the blogger, of course, because Steve Jobs wrote to him, like, posted about it. And I just remember the comment thread back when there were comment threads. The comment thread was just like high-fiving Steve Jobs to be like, honestly, that's kind of the answer, right? And in this world needs criticism and it needs all of these things, and there's a certain place for that. But this isn't one of them. Also, side note, if you aren't a big fan of Ryan and I in profanity, this probably won't be the episode for you because we feel pretty strongly about this topic.
Yep.
And the F-bomb usually comes out consistently. So either, arm the mute button.
Yeah, you're probably going to hear some colorful language today. So just be prepared.
Be prepared. Well, and again, we're pretty damn passionate about this topic. So it just appreciate our horrible decorum for what it is, which is we we turn into mindless cavemen because we are incredibly passionate about this topic and the support.
I think what you're saying is we give a fuck.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid it, but I couldn't. But look, okay. So coming back, no one else even took a swing. The fundamental issue that we start with, when again we're separating the people that we're concerned about. First order of magnitude should be: are the people who we're concerned about, are they the types of people that actually should have a voice in all of this, right?
Right. Is this Mark Andreessen or is this Ryan sitting courtside?
I mean, think about it this way. If you were to kind of list out all of the people that you're concerned about, and by the way, you should. And here's how I've done it. And this is weird and maniacal and whatever, but I'm not too proud to admit it. When I was all stressed out about failing, I started to think about all the people that I was stressed out about failing in front of, right? And kind of who was specifically in the audience. I took it off the table to be this amorphous kind of cloud of people. And I started to list who exactly those people are. By the way, it's never as many people as you think it is, right? But I listed who they are, and then I did this weird thing because I put everything in a spreadsheet because I'm a weirdo. I listed each person, and then I listed exactly what I was concerned about them thinking, and then what the outcome of that thought would be, right? So I remember at the time, like, I was concerned about the press. I don't know why. We weren't even getting enough press to matter, so I think
We don't care about you. We're not going to write about the fact that you failed. We didn't even know you existed. Yeah.
answered nothing. But this was just a mental exercise, and I'm a big fan of this, of just externalizing stuff in my head so I can see it. And a couple things happened, and I thought this was fascinating. First thing that happened is once I got past row like 16, and I was really trying, I ran out of people in the audience. So in my mind, the stands were packed of people that I was going to disappoint and be a failure in front of, right? But when I had to dissect it and say, okay, well, who are we talking about exactly? And I had to point to the faces in the crowd. There were like 16, and if I'm being honest, 16 was like a tortured number, right? Because I thought I was gonna get to like hundreds.
Right. 16, you can rent a van at Hertz that you can fit 16 people in, right? It's not a lot of people.
You can forget about 16 people. Um, and so the second thing that I did though is I said, what am I concerned about them thinking? What is that thought bubble that's in their head? And again, I just wanted to see it. I also wanted to see if they were different each time or if it was just kind of the same thing, right? No surprise, kind of mostly the same thing, right? Here's investors that I'm concerned about. I don't see why their thought process would be really any different. So really, I can just group all of those and say all investors have this response. Now it's just one person in the audience, right? And this was just this really kind of interesting technique that I used to get it out of my head. But once I did it, I realized there were only a handful of people, or in this case, maybe some archetypes that I was concerned about. And then their concerns weren't that big. And then, kind of the what we talked about in the past episode, the time and the intensity
Yep, I was going to say severity and duration really important here.
were really small. But the one thing that stood out to me is that all the names that I put down of people that I was concerned about, like how they would feel, a lot of them weren't founders. And I thought that was really interesting. And then I started to think, I'm like, what would they compare my experience or what I just went through to their experience, right? And maybe that was me just trying to like, satisfy my own ego and validate myself. I'm sure it was, but it was telling. I was like, man, there's a lot of people that I'm listing out that actually have no idea what I just went through, and yet I'm somehow really concerned about their input. And again, maybe it's trivializing a little bit, but it worked because I started to realize that those people weren't really who I was concerned about. Who I was concerned about were the actual other founders. Those were the people whose opinions I was like, ugh, they've played this game, right? When Tom Brady loses, he doesn't lose a lot, but when he does, he's worried about what other athletes think because in his mind, those are the people that have an understanding of what they do. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, he's worried he'll get moved to somewhere weird like Tampa Bay.
And just keep winning.
Still win the damn Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So I think that the next aspect of this, and to your point, Will, as you went through that list and you started calling that down to just the people who really mattered, in this case, those being the other founders, and mattered in the sense that they had context, not necessarily mattered in the sense that they were going to provide you a whole bunch of objective feedback or anything else, right? But they matter in the sense that they had that context. And I think, and go back to that experience. So when you talk to those other founders, did you find yourself facing a lot of disappointment, a lot of judgment? Were they telling you all the things that you should have done right? Is that how that went down?
It was the polar opposite. Now, but there's two parts to this, right? And I want to be clear. Part of it is the moment we start putting thought bubbles and word bubbles over people's icons, right? We're screwed because we're always going to write the worst possible, outcome.
Yep.
And we're going to assume that is fact, which again, in every context of human communication is a massive miss. And we do it at scale at this point in our lives. The second thing is we totally overlook that they have their own line of thinking. And by the way, we can't just predict all the words that are going to come out of their mouths or what matters to them or anything else like that. And it's such a miss because when I'm making that spreadsheet of everybody's responses, isn't that exactly what I'm doing? I'm telling them what they think, which I mean, when you say it out loud, sounds ridiculous, right? But that's essentially what I was doing. So anyway, so I sat down with founders, right? Some that were marginally connected to this thing, others that weren't that connected to it. And here's what I got from all of them that wasn't on my spreadsheet, massive miss. I got empathy, right? None of them were like, boy, what an idiot you were, right? And even if they were thinking that at some level, and I don't think they were, what they were saying is, hey, I actually went through the same thing, and here's what it looked like, right? Empathy, sympathy. Like they were basically trying to say, you're not alone and you're okay, which is the polar opposite of what was on my spreadsheet. You weren't supposed to say that. That wasn't on my spreadsheet.
The letter that I wrote from you to me said something really different, right? Like, that's not what you said at all. Like, who are you?
I think, Ryan, I think we forget that the people who have been in our shoes feel very differently about how we feel.
Of course they do.
They look at it as, "Holy shit, I've either been through this or this could happen to me." You were mentioning the other day that you had an incident, involving somebody else's kid, and this just rang so true. What was that?
Yeah, so you've the ability to feel empathy, right? So a friend of ours, friends of ours, a couple friends of ours, had left town, not far, but they were out of town, kind of out of reach, and their little girl had an accident. She's totally fine, but she had got some pretty classic kid cuts. The one above the eyebrow, the one at the corner, collided with the coffee table. Like all head wounds, lots of blood, and a very sad little girl. My wife jumped into action and just took on being a mom, right? And she's the one that took her to the clinic, got her to the hospital. We just kind of circled the wagons, but like you feel it, right? You understand exactly. And I'm the one that called the parents to let them know what had happened and what was going on and what steps we were taking and what they wanted us to do. But in that moment, there was no, there was zero separation between me and that having been my own child, right? And the same thing happens in a startup company because you can imagine how would I feel were I an hour and a half away and this happened and I knew I couldn't get there. I couldn't be the one, cuddling her and calming her and making her feel better. It's an awful feeling. The same thing happens in a startup company, whether you've been through it before or not. Doesn't matter. You can still project yourself into that moment and go, I know what that would feel like, and it does not feel good, right? So again, the last thing you're going to come with is criticism. The last thing you're going to come with is, oh, well, why weren't you there? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you, make sure that they'd be safe? It's not those feelings at all. It's, I know what that would feel like. I can empathize with that. I feel bad for you. By proxy, I feel bad just even thinking about what that would be like for me. So that definitely happens. I mean, that in the moment when we start to share. And again, like it doesn't have to be full on failure. That's sort of what we're talking about today is, the wind down, the end of the era, the end of the startup. But even just when things go wrong within a startup company, right? Like, you blew your entire marketing budget and nothing happened, right? You made a really bad hire. You lose a co-founder. There's a lot of things that can feel really, like failures at the time, right? They're just part of the journey, but they are failures in some way, shape, or form. And we can relate to all of those things, right? Some of us have been through full failure, some of us have been through the partial.
Right. But and part of this is deliberately surrounding ourselves with the people that actually know what we just went through. And see, I instinctively tried to do the opposite. I figured these were all my peers, and I'm ashamed, and so I want to keep them at length. I don't want to have them see my shame and my failure, right? Which is, to be fair, no one gave a shit, right? I mean, and when I say that, I don't mean that they didn't care about me. I mean, none of them were put off by what I did wrong, right? And I failed at a startup, big deal, right?
Yeah, but that's not how it feels.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What I should have done is I should have grabbed those folks as quickly as I could have and surrounded myself with them and had those conversations over and over and over so that I could start to understand that my feelings were right, as far as like my lack of validation and all these things, and have the right people giving me input. And so like now, we get somebody who's in a founder group and they've got 7 other founders that are sitting around them that know exactly what they've just gone through. And in many cases, they've been meeting with them constantly and talking to them constantly for months, years, whatever. And really understand the journey, really understand the outcome. But here's the other side of it that I don't think folks understand. I really should have leaned on those people to help me get me through to the other side, right? All of those people in the stands weren't going to help me with shit, right? They were going to have their opinions or whatever, and like it wasn't going to be helpful, right? I need to surround myself with people who really know what I just went through, so they could help me through it. And I think that was my biggest miss, which was not just grabbing onto those folks as quickly as possible and being as honest as possible, at what was essentially a really vulnerable time.
Yeah, the instinct is to defend. When the instinct should be, or the reaction should be, to open yourself up, be vulnerable, and allow help to happen. Right? Yeah, we've all seen like that honorable scene in sports where somebody limps off the field with the injury. But let's be honest, this isn't the kind of injury you walk off, right? This is big, this is bad, right? Allow yourself to be carried off on the stretcher. It's there for a reason. And the people who are going to bear the weight of that stretcher are the founders who are around you. And there is absolutely no shame in that, right? In fact, I think that, being in a position where when you open up, and you will find that this is almost always true, that founders will want to dive in with that empathy, sympathy, and help. That says something, right? It says something about, it's a recognition of the effort that you put in. And you've talked about this before, but the respect comes from the playing, right? Not just from the winning, right? They will support you, not because, oh, well, you did this amazing thing, or like, gosh, this it should have worked, or like, something you did in the past was amazing. This is just one failure. Has nothing to do with it. They're looking
Absolutely
at you
not.
going, this guy, this girl, this gal, this woman, this man, whoever did everything they could, ground themselves into the dirt to try to make this work. This is where they are now. Let's pick them up. Let's dust them off. Let's remind them that this is worth moving forward with. Again, you'll be okay, but not on your own, right? So again, it's that instinctual shift where we have to go, I want to hide myself from having to have this conversation because I'm afraid of the negativity that's going to come at me. And just know, if you're not yet in that position, or that you're finding yourself on this path, open up to that. Allow that help to come in. It's going to make this far easier, far faster. So when we talk about those two magic words that you've brought up, severity and duration, this is going to reduce the severity of the failure, and it's going to reduce the duration of the period of time in which it impacts your life. Big time. Like, we're talking exponentially.
There's another side to this, which is we're talking about, as the founder, how we should reach out. But what we're implying, and I think let's talk about it directly. If you're in this founder's orbit, and they've, the business is just taken a header, it is incumbent upon you, like, with respect to every other founder, to step in and help. And understand that many of them are going to be resistant to help.
Yes.
Right? Their first thing is that they want to create that insulation, to stay out of my
That
world,
shield goes
etc.
up.
Hey,
Yep.
Quick terse response message. Hey, thanks for the help. Appreciate you checking in. Bye. Right?
I have such a collection of those.
Yeah, no, I know. And
The thread continues, but only because I force it, right? Like, they wanted to leave it there for all the wrong reasons.
I've got a collection of emails that I've sent to founders I actually don't know that well, whereby I wrote what I considered a long and very personal email, where they'd publicly failed at something, right? And again, it's a founder that I didn't know super well, but well enough that I could send them an email. And I knew their inbox was going to be loaded with all kinds of weird shit. I wanted at least one message that showed absolutely respect for what they did. And while the messages varied, the theme looks something like this. Number one, founder to founder, I've been where you've been. I know what you're feeling. And it's shitty. I won't sugarcoat it. However, founder to founder, I have an amazing amount of respect for what you accomplished, on that journey. And here are the things that you did that no one else has done, right? Call it what you will, but these are things that you did that other people will never do because they don't have, what it takes to even suit up and get on the field. And you're one of very few of us who are even willing to do that. And because of that, you have, an eternal amount of respect. And I think every single time I've sent those, and I think it's unexpected because often, like, where's Will send me an email? Like, where's this coming from? But surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, I get these really heartfelt responses. And more often than not, it's thanks. Like, I actually needed to hear. Actually, I've got a great one. I'm actually going to call one out, if that's okay. And you can actually Google this because I did this publicly. Years and years and years and years ago, Sam Altman, who became the president of YC, long before he became the president of YC, had started a company, I think it was called Looped, and they'd raised a ton of money. This is like in the mid 2000s ish. Sam's young now, but he was even, I mean, he was a kid back then. Looped had sold, I think, to Walmart. And again, my memory's terrible, but like I think for like say $40 million, and maybe they raised 40 million. The information's out there. You can find it. So I'm not revealing anything. But I remember it got posted on the forum Hacker News, and it was basically Looped sells for $40 million, and the thread was incredibly negative, right? And I'm reading this, and my blood is boiling, right? Basically saying, basically, hey, he raised, thought he was a big deal, sold for too little, blah blah blah. And I almost never post in forums. That's the funniest thing, right? Like this is so unique to me, but this pissed me off, right? And so I wrote in the forum, and again, I'm sure this is Googleable. It's sitting there somewhere in archive. I basically said, "Fuck you guys," right? I was like, "None of you understand what it took for him to get where he got to do what he's done, and none of you even deserve to be able to have this conversation." And I remember saying something to the effect of, "You guys are the equivalent of watching someone run an entire marathon and then standing at the finish line at the end and saying, 'Hey, you didn't run it fast enough,' right? Fuck you." And so Sam responds. He emails me, and he said, "Dude, you're the only person that's defended me in all of this." Right? And to be fair, that's Sam Altman, who went on to become like this amazing entrepreneur. And think about his moment, how he was feeling, right? And then to have all the people that should have been in his inner circle gang up on him, right?
Yeah.
It can't happen, right? And I'll never forget, like a couple months later, we ended up getting lunch together. Um, and he was like, I can't thank you enough, right? He's a super kind guy, right? Whatever. And I just remember thinking, like, I would do that for anybody. I have no idea who you are. I just know as another founder, it's not okay.
Yeah, it's not okay. Shouldn't be happening.
And so my point there is, I think for other founders, when another founder, when one of our brothers and sisters is down, it's our job to step up and carry them off the field, right? Like that is what we are here for, and I think that's an important call. You know what I mean?
Again, we are uniquely positioned to provide that empathy, right? They are not going to get it from somewhere else. So to say that slightly differently, if we as founders don't step up to help, nobody else is capable of stepping up and helping in the same way. That's right. It's why when there's an emergency on an airplane, they ask, "Is there a doctor here?" Right? It's not, "Is there anybody else here who'd be willing to try to poke this guy in the throat with a pen?" Right? This is not about your willingness to try. Like a lot of people in your life will be willing to try to help you, right? At that moment, all your good friends, your family, they will be willing to try. They're going to get it wrong, and they may get it wrong in some critical ways that will actually make you feel worse about this, right? They'll tell you things like, "Look, you tried, but good thing you got that career to fall back on," right? Like, last thing I need to hear right now, right? There's a lot of things that people will say, well-intended, and absolutely pave the road to you feeling like hell. So as entrepreneurs, as founders, we owe it to the community to step up in that moment, because we're the only ones who are appropriately equipped to be able to provide the right insight, the right level of empathy, the right level of care, the right level of advice. And people don't always need advice in those moments. What they really do need is just that empathy. And so give it to them, right? Chances are, as a founder, you're going to fail at some point, right? To some degree, you're going to go through a failure. Chances are, as a founder, you've got people around you who are probably failing or about to right now. So take those opportunities, strengthen those bonds, build the community. This is what we're here for, right? And like you said, we're seeing this over and over and over again in Founders Group. And not surprising, right? It's not surprising at all to hear these conversations come up, nor is it surprising that the founders are all jumping to support. But boy, does it feel good to see it happen.
It does feel good to see it happen. And you're right. I think if we were to really look at this, objectively as founders supporting other founders, and if I were to really kind of paraphrase what I would love our dictum and our message to be to another founder, first and foremost, this is not your last startup, right? This is the end of your last startup, right? Very differently, right? You've proven through this whole thing that you have what it takes to suit up and get on the field. And by the way, sometimes it doesn't work. And by the way, maybe the next one won't work, but you still have the respect of all of your peers. And you've shown that you have what it takes to suit up and play. So keep playing, right? Reload. Let's talk about how to get into the next one when you're ready. And when you do, when you suit up again, we'll all be there on your team. Full support all the time.
Fuck yeah.